I've actually been wanting to have this conversation for quite some time. I just never gotten around to it. But why do male characters perform so horribly in Wuthering Waves? The normal consensus that a lot of people like to regurgitate is, well, it's because it's a male character and they don't have a pair of boobs. And what's funny is that's actually true, but it's not the whole truth. A big reason of why male characters perform horribly in Kuro games is by design. And that might blow your mind, but once I break all this information and this aggregate data down to you, it'll make perfect sense. The reality of the situation of male characters in Kuro games is Kuro games is scared to try and really sell you a male character. And I mean that in a literal sense. And I think Jiyan might have traumatized Kuro games. You see, a lot of people are talking about how embarrassing Luke Hurson's cells are based off some things they've seen on the internet. But I think what's more embarrassing than Luke Hurson is actually Jiyan's cells and Jiyan's performance as a whole, considering he's the only character in the entirety of Wuthering Waves that was placed in a position to succeed as a male character. In fact, not only was he placed in a position to succeed, Jiyan had the highest and strongest position to make the most money for Kuro games, and Brother Man failed spectacularly. And I want to talk to you guys about all of this, okay? Let's start off with a post that's going around and making its way around the community. This is a post that some Chinese player shared, or somebody got from a Chinese player and shared. And this apparently represents a large proportion of traffic of Chinese Wuthering Waves players showing off the characters they own in popularity chronological order, right? So up here, these are characters that more people own. Down here are the least owned characters over in China. Now, there is a bit of a grain of salt you need to take into consideration here. Obviously, unless it's like official information, there's always going to be like, it doesn't represent the fullness of the entirety of a community, but I'm actually more inclined to believe it based off of the aggregated data that I've seen elsewhere. But right now, Luke Hurson, and I'm going to be real, this does look hilarious. Brother is a 2.78% over there in China in terms of how many people own him. Now he's got, if you're wondering about all these percentages, this is him at 0, at 1 copy, 2 copy, 3 copy, all the way up to 6. So 7.94% E6. Sorry, there's so many gacha games I play. I always get, is it S6, E6, whatever. But yeah, a lot of people did S6 him for the people that did pull on Luke, but I don't care about that. 2.78% is abysmal. But if you take a look at this, you'll notice that all the male characters, quite literally every single one of the male characters minus one, which is Yao, who was given to us for free, is at the very bottom of this list. All the male characters. And so that would corroborate with people saying people don't like to pull on male characters. That's why they're at the bottom. Like I said, a truth, but not the whole truth. But the reality of the situation is once you look at market trends, marketing campaigns, and how they structure banner scheduling and where they place these characters, as well as meta viability, you come to realize the male characters, with the exception of Jiyan, are done in the worst ways possible. But speaking of which, you know what's more embarrassing than 2.78%? Being an anchor/flagship character for a gacha game as big as what Wuthering Waves was at the time, and still being in the top 5 least owned characters in the history of China players. That is way more embarrassing than Luke Hurson. And I don't mean that as an insult towards Jiyan. I'm just telling you guys that this man had the highest amount of eyes on his banner in the history of the game. You could take Ameth, you could take Kartathea, Augusta, and and they still wouldn't amount to the amount of exposure that this man had when Wuthering Waves dropped. Just to give you a bit of perspective, when Wuthering Waves dropped, it had an astronomical launch. People who don't even play gacha games came to check this game out. Like even Asmongold in the mainstream space, a lot of people, when a new gacha game as big as Wuwa was interesting, especially when it's marketed as like the Genshin killer, whether it does it themselves or other people do it, a lot of people are going to come try that game out. And so I brought up Google Trends to take a look at how big the search volume was on Wuthering Waves when it very first launched, right? And so, oh no, this is the past 3 months. Sorry, let's go to the past 5 years so you can really gain some perspective. When you look at this, this is when Wuwa launched. I want you to look at how tall that graph is compared to the rest of Wuwa. And this is the lifeline of Wuwa up to date. Jiyan had that amount of exposure on him. I mean, he had that amount of exposure on him, and bro's in the top 5 least owned characters in China. What this told Kuro Games is our male characters suck. Fuck the male character thing, abandon ship. We're not doing that. And what's wild is, you know, the unique thing about Jiyan, he's also the only male in the entirety of Kuro Games that anchored on the first half of a patch. Do you know how valuable it is to anchor on the first half of a patch versus a second half? I want you to take a look at this graph here. Okay. I want you to look at this peak, and then I want you to look at this peak. This reflects what first half versus second half trending looks like in gacha games. The first half of a patch is the highest point of money to be made and people to log in and play your game, because the first half of the patch is where all the good stuff is. It's where the MSQ is. It's where the new update is. It's where the most hype and FOMO is. Many people log on the first half, and then they don't come back for the second half. They just wait on the next patch. This is a reality of gacha games. They live and die by hype and FOMO. So that when that hype and FOMO expires, right? You've played through the MSQ, you had your little fun for the first couple of days, dude, dead. Game's dead until the next patch. This is literally a dynamic of the gacha space. It's a pro and it's a con. And so if you don't believe me on that, this is what I like about Steam. I love when games go on Steam, because one thing Steam has that these other, graphs and trends don't have is it actually shows you how many players are logging in. Not how many people are viewing, not how many people are searching up YouTube analytics or titles. How many people are literally logging in the game based off the Steam audience. And what I like about this is it'll show you 3.1, 3.0, 2.8, 2.7. But even if you took away those, I would still know just by looking at the peaks. Whenever it's a peak, that tells you that's a new patch update. Now, with that understanding, look at the in-between. Right? This is 2.8, and this is going to be the second half of 2.8, right? This is 3.0. This is going to be the second half of 3.0. This is 3.1. This is going to be the second half of 3.1. Are you noticing a trend here, right? 2.7, second half of 2.7. If you think I'm wrong, go look at the dates, and you'll know that Shuyan's banner pops up right here. If you look at this is when Chisa's banner pops up. If you look at this is Lene, and this is Mornier. And finally, we have Amith on 3.1. And then down here is Luke Urson. And so what we're noticing here is that the second half of these patches doesn't have the volume of the first half. And that's because the hype and the FOMO, as well as how they structure story and MSQs, all of that goes away most of the time on the second half. There are some exceptions like Lene and Mornier. For an example, like Lene and then Mornier, both of them had an MSQ, right? Now, some people were complaining about 3.0 story and 3.0 second half story being a bit like slow and stuff. I personally enjoyed it. I love the world building of 3.0 second half. I think I was one of the few people that actually enjoyed it a lot. The soul skins, the soul trees and all that jazz. It's besides the point. What I'm trying to say is, sometimes to market and sell both characters, they will give MSQ. And they did that with Lene and Mornier. Furthermore, people logged in to pull on Mornier because they really did want her, because she was meta viable too. She wasn't just like, who cares? She was a character that was pitched in a way, whereas if you pick her up, your, tune break teams are going to be good to go no matter what. And so that's another variable. That actually leads me into a whole nother conversation. Marketing drives sales. Promo, right? What are the most important factors that are going to drive sales for a character? First of all, are they on the first half of the banner? Extremely important, because of how much volume of players will show up on the first half of the patch just to see what's new. Gacha players and casual players, a lot of them show up on the first half of the patch. And then they'll decide in the first couple of days whether they're going to wait on the next patch or continue playing. And I'm gonna be honest, vast majority of people play through the story, have their little fun with that character, and then they just f off until the next patch. That's just what happens. The next thing, how steep is banner competition? This is a very, very important one. And we'll go into that in a bit. Animation budget, right? Is it Kartathea, Augusta Yuno, and Amith? Because those are peak budgets. Or is it like Luke Herson, you know what I mean? Where it's fun, but animation budget clearly is compromised to the point where Jeff Keighley only leaked Amith and didn't leak Luke Herson, right? Those are optics that deter people from being attracted to that other character. Like, oh, they didn't leak Luke, it must be ass. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just the optics. It all goes into marketing. The next thing, story presence and intensity, plus first half of patch hype. This is another thing that's massive. In fact, Amith, I dare say, a lot more people pulled on there than they probably planned for because of how captivated they were by the 3.1 story. Not to mention, she was the focal point of the story. She was the main attraction, right? Think Finon from Honkai Star Rail. Think Acheron from HSR. Or think like from Genshin Impact. I don't know, just think of the main characters there. I haven't played Genshin Impact in a while, but she was the main attraction. And then we got marketing budget, right? Jeff Keighley special or Who Cares special, right? Who Cares special is, yeah, we're not leaking this. We'll show it to you in the live stream. And they won't be the first person we show. They'll be the second person we show. They'll be in the shadow of the high budgeted character to make their kit look less appealing. You know, it's basically like they're treated like either second-class citizens or like a luxury, so to speak. If you can afford it, sure, but honestly, we don't really care. These are male characters. Character design, massive one, right? And it's even stronger if the character design has a transformation in it, like Zani, like Amith, and like even I would say Augusta ult is kind of pseudo-transformation, if you will, and Kartathea. Right? Character design is very important. It's also subjective. And then the final one is main DPS or support. Synergy dependence, meta viability. Are they universal or are they free to play friendly? A lot of the times, again, the male characters get butchered in this regard in one or two or all scenarios. Now, Luke was a main DPS, but unfortunately, his two best in slot supports were shared by an even better DPS with even better budget and even more impact of story presence. He was in the shadow, right? And so once again, male characters get put in the worst situations possible. Now let's go over all of these. All of the male characters except Jiyan are not on the first half of the banner. All of the male characters have incredibly steep competition and are put in very wonky banners positionings. All of the male characters have less budget than Kartathea, Augusta, Yuno, and Amith. I will say Shuyan's budget, I'm gonna be real, or Shuyan's like animation quality is like that one exception. He had incredible animations. He really did, but he failed in all the other aspects, unfortunately. Story presence and intensity, although I loved it, he was an after story put on the second half of the banner after all hype of 2.7 died down. Every odd in terms of like exposure to people, it was packed against him. And if that wasn't enough, synergy dependence, meta viability attached to Galbrina, and then banner scheduling was after Augusta and Yuno, and then there's Galbrina, and it's like, oh, well, if I skipped Galbrina, I'm definitely not pulling Jiyan. Not only does he depend on her, he's not a main DPS. Every single other variable was put against him in terms of marketing and enticing him to pull. Story presence and intensity, not there, right? Except like a little bit of moments here and there, a little R farming, but nothing crazy. Marketing budget, they never get the Jeff Keighley special. They get the Who Cares special. Character design, honestly, I think Wuwa has some of the best male character designs of all time. So I actually, like in Gacha space, right? Honestly, no, not even in Gacha space, just in gaming. They have fantastic male designs. And so they win in that moment, but they fail in like 90% of the other criterias. I also want to come back to this real quick to show you more corroborated data that reflects the trends of Steam charts. Players log in on the first half, super hype, a maximum FOMO and curiosity. And then on the second half, it goes down. Remember we had that conversation earlier? If you are still skeptical and you think this is just exclusive to Steam, we can pop over here to Google Trends and show you the exact same thing, right? You have the 3.0 live stream, then dies. Then 3.0 actually launches, right? This is 3.0 launch, Christmas Eve, and then dies, right? And then we come over here to when Mornier's banner releases, January 14th. Look at that difference in terms of popularity. This is the second half of 3.0, and this amount of people were searching up on the internet on the second half. As I said, these patches live and die by their first halves. Now, that's not to say that people won't come back on the second half. A lot of people do. In fact, the community is quite strong. A lot of people come back on the second half, but the vast majority of people in how they play, Amber Alert, the vast majority of people in how they play gacha games, very front half, very first half heavy. So we look at this again and we see Mornier didn't get nearly as much exposure as Lene, but I bet her sales were probably quite similar because of meta viability, because of character design, because of story relevance. And well, I mean, let's be honest, all those kind of like make sense. And then people also knew through leaks and such that she was a best in slot, not just for Lene, but also any characters in terms of Toon Break, including Amos. And so she's one of those rare exceptions that even though she was put on the second half where she didn't have nearly as much exposure, she still had a strong marketing campaign because of who she was in the story and how she pertained in terms of meta viability to the Toon Break system overall. This is a good example of how second half characters could sell well still. That said, they did line up Lene, Mornier, and then Amos like bowling balls. Boom, 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 right? But this whole purpose of this is to show you how gacha games are, in terms of exposure, hype, and FOMO on the first half. Right, the first half is the strongest point every time, and then the second half is over here. This is Luke Herson. This is Luke Herson right here, this little point. Now, if we go to YouTube, it'll reflect a bit differently because YouTube is how many people are searching up content after these patches drop. And then this is going to be when February 4th is when Amos and 3.1 drops. And now this is Luke Herson. And then now we're dying again, right? Until 3.2 comes out with Sigrika. We'll see how that looks, but I'm here to tell you it's not going to look that good. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That's a video for another time. This corroborates with the Steam charts, though. As you can see, it cooperates with it in the exact same vein. This is Twitch viewership. And I already did this to organize so you aren't confused. Twitch viewers, right? This is 2.4, 2.7, 2.8, 3.0, 3.1. Once again, you look at the peaks and then you look at everything else, right? 3.1, 3.0, this is going to be 3.0 second half. Dead. Well, not dead, but nowhere near the peak of this, right? 3.1 peak, 3.1 second half. That's Luke Herson. Look at the fall off there. We live and die by the first half of the patches. Now, why am I showing you all of this data? Because all of this is going to make sense when I show you why the male characters are doomed to fail. And then we'll go into a good conversation here at the end. When we look at the entire banner scheduling of Wuthering Waves since the dawn of the game, and this only goes up to Lene and Mornier, right? But it's all I need to make a point. When you look at the banner scheduling of all the characters except Jiyan, Jiyan's he's the diamond in the rough that got treated right, and then he just flopped and traumatized Kuro Games for their male characters. When we look at the banner scheduling, he doesn't matter because he was given for free. But let's find Brant. I want you to look at Brant. Okay, Brant is actually not in a situation that is as bad as Jiyan or Luke, but he's also not in a good situation. For one, Brant was not like a relevant character. I'm not going to say he wasn't a relevant character. He was not the main stage, right? He was likable, sure, but he wasn't the main stage. He wasn't pushed to you like Karthithia. He wasn't pushed to you, not Carlotta either. He wasn't pushed to you like Amos or Augusta and Yuno. He was a cool character, a good supporting character, but that was about it. But guess what? When did they put him? They put him on the second half, and then they put him on 2.1. The biggest filler patch in all of 2.0 was 2.1. Yep, this was the patch, in case you don't remember, where we just had a fishing event. And he wasn't put on the first half of the fishing event. He was put on the second half of the fishing event. So that was Brant. Furthermore, let's talk meta viability, synergy dependence, and all that jazz. Don't get me wrong. I think Brant's a beast. I think people who don't own Brant sleeping hard. That said, he's attached to the hip of fusion teams and a very particular fusion team at that. I want you to ask yourself, was Brant the most mind-effed character in terms of should you pull on him to ever exist? Because unlike a lot of characters, Brant's synergies were nowhere to be seen. Brant's synergy was Chang Li. I want you to look at how many banners went by before Chang Li finally got somebody that pretty much synergized with her. And then just think about Brant though. Brant is like, you're sitting here going, who the hell do I play this guy with? He's a tank, he's a DPS, he's a sub deep. Identity crisis. A lot of people are skeptical about it, right? And he's a male character, and he's kind of like put in this weird spot. He's in 2.1 second half too, so nowhere near the exposure of a 2.0 patch or the first half of the 2.1 patch. Makes perfect sense that Brant's sales tanked hard. And when we come up here and we look at this scenario, this is atrocious. First of all, Karthithia was marketed to you by a Jeff Keighley leak that showed the greatest animations ever at that point in time. Then she was marketed to you because she started her story presence way the back here with the 2.0 story. You met her immediately right there. You met her again in 2.2, and that was a beautiful story. And then in 2.4, she was still in the story. They sold her to you as hard as they possibly could, brother. And so then she drops in 2.4, first half, not second half, because that's when the highest pressure gets presented to you. And then before that, they had Shakona. Shakona sold well because everybody knew she was best in slot for Kartathea. This is one of those exceptions where although Shakona was put on the second half, it didn't matter because everybody wanted her just for Kartathea. Kartathea was that highest prized of a possession. Then we think about Lupa. Look at Lupa on this Chinese data. Lupa is almost top 5 least owned characters. You know why that is? Because they did Lupa the same way they did Luke Herson, just not as bad. They put Lupa in the literal worst spot in all of 2.0. What spot is that? Right next to the most prized character in all of 2.0. After people exhausted all their resources on Zani, Shakona, and Kartathea, because Zani was marketed quite well too, I'm gonna be honest. But they exhausted all the resources. People just didn't have enough money to get the Lupa. That's the reality of it. And if they skipped Brant, then they probably are looking at Lupa like a question mark, because Lupa was also a support character, not a main DPS. And so Lupa was one of those situations where she got butchered in terms of marketing campaign. Was in the story, fun, budget wasn't all that, but kind of butchered. Still, nowhere near as bad as a Brant, nowhere near as bad as a Jiyan or a Luke. Finally, we got Frolova. Nobody after her. Story presence was absolutely insane. Has been involved in the story since the start of 1.0. Campaign for Frolova, pretty damn peak. But this is where things got ugly. This is where you realize that male characters were just set up and doomed to fail. We go into 2.6. Jeff Keighley leak, one of the most beautiful orchestrated synergies and poetry in terms of how they synergize with one another you've ever seen. Sun and moon, bro, like cinema. Everybody pulled on one or the other, if not both, at the same time. Everybody, right? Everybody owns Yuno too, because Yuno was a diamond in the rough. Yuno's a character that people thought was a support, ended up being a DPS, a support, a healer, and just being fantastic. Now she has a standalone team. This character is absolutely insane. But one of the best character designs of all time was prevalent in the 2.6 first half of the story too. So that was part of the marketing campaign. Has beautiful feet and people go crazy about that in the gacha space. Her campaign was insane to the point where another very rare exception of despite being on the second half, it didn't matter. Because that many people wanted her because she was attached to the hip of Augusta and she was standalone, meta viable, synergy, not dependent, honestly, just do her own thing, and then all the other stuff. I want you to take that in consideration, and now I want you to look at Jiyan. Second half of 2.7 after the finale dies down. Has an after story, not an MSQ. So already we're off to a really rough start. To top that off, Brother's not even a main DPS. He's a support. Not only is he a support, he's not even a universal support. He's attached to the hip of a Galbrina. All of these are pointing down in terms of value. Every single one of them. Least amount of market exposure. Finale's over with. Hype and FOMO's done. He's on the back end of a second half of story. It's only 1 hour long. People slept on it. One of my favorite stories of all time in this game, by the way. Loved it. Bro was set up to fail. And yet still a lot of people pulled on him when you consider all of those metrics. Came after these two highest prize possessions before Kartathea. And then Galbrina, if you skipped her, you definitely didn't pull Jiyan. It was a waste of time. Even if you had to hold for Lovis, who cares? A lot of people skipped. That's just the reality of it. Then after him, Pump Fake, Chisa. Everybody thought she was the most prized possession character to have for 3.0 synergies. That wasn't the case. But nobody came after her. Whenever there's a banner, nobody's after it. It actually encourages people to pull on the character because they still think, oh, I can save a little bit. And then Luke Herson. I don't even need to explain that. Lene into Mornier, into Amith, and everything else I already explained. You start to see right now why I say male characters are doomed to fail. Guys, I would love, and I'm sure a number of us would, if Kuro Games gave a male character the spotlight that Finon had in HSR. Finon's one of the highest selling characters of all time in HSR, actually, by the way. And that's because they gave him the main stage. They gave him the Jeff Keighley special, which means, not literally, Jeff Keighley didn't leak Finon, but I'm saying like they gave him all the budget in all facets of what makes a character sell in terms of story relevance, budget in terms of animation quality, meta viability, like all the above. Just do that with a male character one time. Who cares about Jiyan? Y'all have improved tremendously from 1.0 Kuro versus 3.2 Kuro. You have newfound skills, experience, wisdom. You know how to sell a character now. And if they don't perform as well as if a female character was there, who cares? Y'all are already set up in a position to succeed, even if that male character does 75% of the sales that a woman would have did there, right? And I'll tell you right now, if you make a male character pop off like Finon did, going against the gods and all that crazy stuff, brother, he's gonna do work. I am not of this belief that if it's a male, they're just not gonna sell well. I have seen demonstrably so in Hoyoverse games, male characters pop off. Did y'all know that Imbiber Lune was on the first banner of HSR, and he actually, I believe he either matched or outsold Jingliu, right? It's not about male character sometimes, it's about how well they're marketed, how much budget is put into their kits in terms of quality of animations. Imbiber Lune with that charge up state was fire, it was. And how meta viable they are, dependence on characters or not, all of these factor into people pulling on characters. It really does. It's not just male. It's so not going to sell. I agree. If you put a male against a woman every time, though, they're going to get no diffed. Often at times, like almost probably 8 times out of 10, they're going to get no diffed, right? But then you have those characters like Zhongli, who they have this story presence where they're like literally a god, and people even have reverence towards them in real life in terms of like a mythological culture sense. They represent some deity or something. There's a million ways to sell male characters, right? It's just like, and again, it doesn't even matter if they don't sell that well. Just give them a MSQ one time. Then people would really have the answer. Okay, they will really have the answer on these things. That's gonna wrap up my thoughts, man. You guys comment down below. Let me know what you think. I thought this was a great conversation. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.